Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and today on the Roundup for Wednesday, January 10th, 2024, we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the past 7 days. And as we do each week, we take the questions that we ask from our newsletter that comes out every Monday. And there are 2 forms you can get that newsletter in. You can subscribe through our website at smieconsulting.org/subscribe, and I'll be dropping the link to that website in the chat. And if you prefer to get your email news or your international ed news via email, there is a link on that site where you can submit your information and subscribe to the email version of that newsletter. I'll drop the link to this most recent edition from Monday in the chat as well. That newsletter comes out in email version at 9 a.m. Eastern every Monday. That's not a holiday. And the other version is in LinkedIn. If you prefer your international ed news that way, you can get your LinkedIn version, which now has, between the 2 versions, over 1,600 subscribers. Very excited to have crossed that 1,600 threshold, and happy to be providing this kind of content to international educators around the world every Monday. And the themes of the newsletter are centered around two main areas: social media and international education. That's the name of the company, SMIE, Social Media and International Education Consulting. And what we do is in the newsletter present our quick takes, our hot takes on key news stories in social media, international education, and often where those overlap, and provide those to you in our kind of bite-sized social media chunks that you can get in the newsletter and then throughout the week on our social media platforms, each individual story. And then what we do is we take a look at the newsletter each week and we pick some themes we see running through those news stories and focus on those here on the Roundup, our International Education live chat every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, to go a little bit more in depth and to kind of share how these news stories can and do impact, and should, in a lot of cases, impact what we do in international education in the United States in particular. Though we do have folks who listen in regularly, either live for the live chats on Wednesdays at 1 across our social channels, or on repeat on any of them, or listening to the audio-only podcast. And thanks everybody for downloading that and subscribing to that feed as well. So the first question of the day is, are international students really a top CBP priority right now? And when I say should they be, it's really should they be a top CBP priority in terms of enforcement and nitpicking and going next level on students who have legitimately been awarded visas at a U.S. consulate or embassy overseas, gone through myriads of security checks, now get to the border and all of a sudden get into secondary, are turned around, had previously been allowed entry into the United States for their studies and then being refused entry and sent home. Those are troubling stories anytime we hear them. We heard them during the time after 9/11. We heard them after Trump introduced his travel bans in 2017, in January 2017, the day after his inauguration. So we wonder, when we hear these stories, and it usually happens in the fall and right before classes begin at a lot of college campuses, and it always happens in the spring and January to a lesser extent, but we've been hearing some stories lately, particularly related to Chinese students being targeted at the border. And there's a couple of different articles I'll be posting here for you. First is from China Daily, which is the Chinese Communist Party mouthpiece for news related to anything China in the world. And that obviously takes a very damning view of the U.S.'s attitude towards Chinese students, and like anything, it gets blown completely out of proportion when it comes to coverage and the disgrace that it brings on China, that a country as powerful as the U.S. would turn away these students and all of that. So the real issues here with this article, and we've seen this a couple different times where the China Review News says it's reported that recently, when entering the U.S. border, several Chinese students suffering from lengthy interrogations and their cell phones, computers, and other electronic devices were inspected. Some of them saw their visas revoked and were given 5-year bans for entering the United States. And so this is an interview with Wang Wenbin, one of the Chinese Communist Party leaders, and I think maybe the foreign minister now. I'm not sure. Basically, the government official says the U.S. has long been wantonly suppressing and ill-treating Chinese students traveling to the U.S. with lawful and valid identifications and visas, and there's a lot of truth to that. It certainly was going on during the Trump administration when the China Initiative was launched, and that it puts any Chinese students that were applying for high-tech or STEM visas from military complex civil military fusion institutions, universities in China were under increasingly high levels of scrutiny and often denied visas out of hand before they even applied. But these are students that are being stopped at the border by CBP. Now, this is a philosophical question I have for my colleagues here, and there's also an article from Karen Fisher from the Chronicle has indicated that has this interview story, but it's really a bit of a challenge to really disagree too much. Obviously, there's a lot of hyperbole that's used in these reports, and I oftentimes take it with a grain of salt in terms of the reality of it. But there have been Chinese students in recent weeks who have been denied entry, who previously had been in the U.S. studying in the U.S. at doing degrees at U.S. colleges and universities, that were sent home. So this is a reality. It's happened, and I question the resources that are used by the federal government in this manner. When you have to look no further than what's happening on our southern border, and it only takes one eye to see what's happening there. It's an open door. There are the amount of Border Patrol officers in the last 3 years that have been committed to actually patrolling the border has dropped dramatically. They've been basically assigned a lot of paperwork to process all these people, not actually doing enforcement of laws. That is a priority at the southern border that does not exist anymore, enforcing the laws that are on the books. And this is very much even a bipartisan issue now, and members of the president's own party are rallying against the policies of the government, the current U.S. government, as it relates to the southern border and the impact it is having, not only in that region and in districts on the border, but across the country, in sanctuary cities in New York, Chicago, Denver, other cities around the country that have been the destinations for a lot of these migrants coming into the United States. That 75% or more of those that have been let in, the 12 million that have been let in the last year, without papers, without claiming asylum, most of them, or economic refugees or whatever it might be. If they're caught at all, most it's catch and release into the country. The greater majority are let into the country and no one knows where they are. They have maybe a phone number of where they might be going, of the person who they're maybe staying with, whatever. But it's cartels getting these people in. It's allowing the fentanyl that's been flooding the country in the last decade to really have unlimited access into the U.S. And the country is suffering for it. But the administration has not prioritized that southern border and has allowed millions into the country who do not have a legitimate reason to be here. Yet we have students who have gone through a rigorous visa process at the U.S. consulate and embassy in their home country, in this case China, that have gotten legitimate visas, have had to go through significant screening, security screening and checks to even get to the point where they get a visa, that have traveled legally to the United States on a plane, have got all the right documentation, some of whom have already been in the United States studying, and they are basically targeted by over-aggressive CBP officers who will find a post that somebody might have said on their WeChat account that might be anti-U.S., and all of a sudden they're targeted. This is different from international students who come and openly advocate and support Hamas, a terrorist organization. Those students can and should be removed from the country. That's just my opinion. Most of my colleagues in the profession would support that you can't openly espouse association with a known terrorist organization and legitimately be allowed in the United States, because those are values. Terrorists around the world who have committed such atrocities should not be. Students who openly support and advocate for Hamas goals should not be allowed in the country. They should be removed. The Chinese students that are coming in, they've liked a post that is anti-American. This is different from supporting a terrorist organization. China and the U.S. have been in conflict for years, socially, politically. This is not news, and espousing those views are not something we should prevent from allowing into our country. This is not liking a post is not grounds for dismissal. There's a lot of over eagerness on the part of certain CBP officers when it comes to screening of international students. They all say that we don't want to let the next 9/11 terrorist into the country. Well, we know that there have been terrorists on the watch list that have been let into the country, terrorist watch list across the southern border, because it's an open door now. They're not going to be coming in legally, having gone through the process that they have to go through, and expect them to be caught. So this is a rant, and I recognize that right off the top, but I would urge for our CBP officers to really think about what they're doing when they're interrogating our international students who have already gone through very rigorous screening processes to get to the point where they're at the border, where they've traveled for a day, they're tired, they just want to get to their college or university. So it's a rant. I recognize it. I hope that you can understand and appreciate that there's a little bit of a disconnect going on in terms of policies for CBP officers at airports related to international students, as it relates to these Chinese students that have been sent home recently, or versus what's happening at the southern border. Why is that priority so much different, and use of resources so much more focused on getting international students who have gone through all the right processes to come into this country legally? That's my question. Okay, on to the next topic of the day, and that is how international student friendly are U.S. job ads. Now, we talk about on our campuses, because we actually have control over these things, we talk about the fact that in the United States, there are many more opportunities for international students in terms of the universities that they can attend, to the job opportunities, the kinds of careers that they can pursue once they're done with their degrees, that they have, particularly in the STEM fields, 3 years of work permission per degree level, bachelor's, master's, and doctoral level, that they can do in the United States and get that work permission. So a student who comes and finishes a bachelor's degree and goes all the way through to PhD could work legally in student status for up to 9 years if they're a STEM student. That's incredible. But the challenge is, and this is something that we have little direct control over on our campuses, because we're not the ones, unless we're hiring students as professors if they've done the doctorate, or as employees if they have particular talents that we could use. We can use the H-1B exemption that universities and educational institutions have to hire as many as they want. But the challenge is, for the greater majority of international students who want to work in the United States, they have a very challenging time finding jobs, sorting through all the jobs that are available. And there are hundreds and thousands of jobs available, they have a hard time sorting through them all because there's aren't many of them that explicitly say they are open to hiring international students. And this is something that I proposed when I first did my first visit to UNLV. This is almost 3 years ago now, 3 years ago this coming May, where we had a group of our colleagues in different service offices around campus and had a conversation with the career services person and had asked a couple questions to find out where they are with their current services that are specific to international students. And at the time, they didn't have anything. And I asked them, well, you have job fairs on campus, 3 or 4 job fairs a year, right? Oh, yeah, multiple job fairs. And you have literally hundreds of employers that are coming to campus every year to interview our students and potentially hire them, right? Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we have a subset of our students. We have first-gen students that we cater to. We have military vets that we cater to. We have various minority campus student groups on campus. We're a Hispanic serving institution and an Anapizi institution. So we have student groups that we do things for and provide services for because they are at a disadvantage. First-gen students, minority students, whatever it is, so that they have special needs that we can help them get what they need. International students are no different. They have a different set of needs as well, and they need to know, and they have a very different set of needs because there are legal hurdles that they have to face that no other student group does on campus, other than maybe perhaps the undocumented dreamers. And that would be working for companies that actually can and will hire them. And I asked, well, what if we asked on our application to participate of all these companies, do you hire international students on OPT? Do you know what OPT is? Maybe it's another question. And also, will you sponsor students for H-1B visas? Those two answers to those two questions alone can cut the list of companies down from maybe 300, maybe down to 50 or 60 that actually will say, yes, we will consider hiring international students either for OPT and or H-1B. So this is a simple question that you add that to an application for companies that are participating in job fairs on your campus. Suggest this to your career services folks. Get that list so that when an international student comes to a fair, and whether it's an online app or a paper form, they can see an asterisk next to the companies that, they will hire international students. So they can focus their time and effort to going around to the 50 or 60 that will hire international students rather than going around to all 300 and getting 250 no's before they get to the one that might help them. So this is something that we do have control over that. We can influence and affect the resources and opportunities we present to our current students. So that's one thing that we can do as institutions. What we can't do is write the job descriptions or the job ads that companies out there have for prospective employees. Now, this is a part of an educational process that maybe needs to happen with local employers, that you can work with your International Student and Scholar Services Office and your career Service or Professional Development Office to work together to educate the employers that are coming to campus. So you do pre-job fair orientations for students, maybe do pre-job fair appointments for the employers that are coming in. Maybe do that months in advance so that they're prepped to be able to handle questions from international students if they haven't already come to you for any advice on that. So these are steps that you can take to control what goes on outside of your campus environment in terms of for employment opportunities for students in your areas. So I would the reason for this question really comes out of an article that was in the Pi News this past week that focuses on a headline: only 1.6% of U.S. job openings have international talent-friendly wording. And this is an important distinction here. For those who are familiar with the student agency, educational agency, HOLREN, they have developed a kind of a post-study work version, a company connected to it called F1 Hire. And they have built an AI database of jobs that scrolls all the job openings out there on LinkedIn and various other job boards, and then does homework on those companies to see if they do have have hired international students, puts that in there, puts salary requirements and all of that for international students in there. So that is a service that they provide, F1 Hire. I've known Andrew Chen for a few years now, and this is a new company they've launched in the last year, and this article is kind of a promo for them. But the point isn't necessarily what's in the article, but is that with only 1.6% of U.S. job openings ads have wording that would be attractive to international students, and he has a couple things in the article that he suggests what those are and can and should be. This is sort of a template for us. And working with our career services offices as international offices, working together to make sure that our students have access to the best information available for future students who are looking to go on into the workplace in your area. So that's obviously something you can have some influence on by communicating with your employers that do come to campus regularly, by doing workshops with them. If for those who sign up on your form and say they do hire, maybe that's including a workshop for them on ads that they can write. That would, if they want to attract international talent, to have wording that would be better reflective of the kind of employees that they want to hire, to open that door for international students. So that's something that I wholeheartedly agree with, this concept that we can be doing more with companies who hire our students on a regular basis, to work with them to help make it their kind of jobs that they have that they can hire international students for, make the postings for those jobs a little bit more relevant for an international student audience as well. So it helps increase the range of potential candidates that they can get, and better qualified candidates if they know that, if international students know that they are sought after by these companies, or at least will not be refused by these companies. So I think that there's a lot of value there. So great read. I would encourage just learning more about this concept. And the company F1 Hire. It's a subscription service that colleges and career services offices can use to provide opportunities for their students to access the database. No, students are not charged for the service. So in terms of the last topic of the day, we have one that we've been seeing some of the impacts of this based on government decisions that were made in the last 6 months that are now starting to bear some very poor fruit, poor harvest. Can we say that? The topic the question is, what happens when government policy impacts key sending markets? And we're going to look specifically here at two countries, Canada and the UK. We know that in Canada's case, they had a very significant row last summer with India. There was a Sikh nationalist who was a Canadian resident, was assassinated in Canada, and the Canadian government believes that it was perpetrated by Indian nationals, or how do we say it? By operatives for the Indian government. The proof hasn't been revealed or shared or any of that, but that's the allegation that was made by the Canadian government. And that has caused a significant rift between Canada and India politically. There was a diplomatic tit for tat that Canada kicked out a certain number of Indian diplomats, and then India did the same for Canadian diplomats. The challenge has been, for those who aren't aware, India is Canada's #1 market. And has been for at least 3 or 4 years. And as a result, there was fears that the study permit folks, the diplomats who do the study permit processing in India, were, because they had been kicked out, they weren't going to be able to keep up with all the study permit processing that they needed to get students in for the fall and then now for the spring as well. So the reality of what's happened is this was seen by many in Canada, that what happened as, well, India is not playing well with us anymore. But in India, it was seen a couple different ways. It was seen by the government as, well, we're kicking some of your diplomats out who do study permit processing, so you can find a way to figure out how that's going to happen now. I think they were down to 10% or 25% of their staffing to actually do study permits processing in the peak season this summer. now that they were relocated to other countries or back in China back in Canada to do the processing. So they were still doing it, but just remotely. But the in-country stuff wasn't happening at nearly the volume that it needed to. But the reality is the damage was already done. This diplomatic spat was taken personally by a lot of Indians, prospective Indian students. There have also been some high-profile issues with some of the vocational colleges in Canada in terms of their over-enrollment of students or having to revoke offers of admission, that the students that have come have gotten deported or sent home, a variety of different reasons, that a good number from India. That many of these private vocational colleges are 90% or more Indian students. A couple of those have closed in Quebec. M College is one of them. Others in Ontario province having similar challenges with oversubscription for Indian students in these vocational programs that really are just pathways for these Indians looking to come, do a quick study, and then go into the Canadian economy as workers and potentially residents eventually. So this pathway is now becoming less popular, shall we say. You've also had the Canadian government changing the amount of funding that every international student who wants to get a study permit has to show, increasing from $10,000 to $20,000 Canadian dollars, which is ironic that that's what everybody has to show, regardless of what the price of the institution they're going to attend is. So that is a legitimate way by the Canadian government to make sure that more students, the students that they are giving study permits to, at least have enough money to survive on during the academic year. So that's a little bit of a challenge. But the challenge for Canada now is they have their numbers have dropped off significantly. The number of study permit applications processed for Indians is down over 40% since July as a result of this diplomatic row. And that's going to have a bottom line effect on all of these vocational colleges and universities that rely on these Indian students. There's going to be further challenges ahead with the new trusted or designated institutional framework that they're introducing in Canada, where institutions who maybe don't have as great a reputation will get lower priority in terms of visa, study permit processing, and may even be taken or eventually taken off the list of that have the ability to receive these international students, which is a death knell for most of those private colleges. So the numbers are dropping from India, the key number one market for Canada. There's another article that was in the newsletter this week that shows that some other countries are starting to pick up the slack a little bit for the significant drop off in Canada. Some from Africa, some from some other regions as well. But the damage is really being done in a key market. So government policy is having a direct impact on student flows from the biggest market for Canada. The flip side of this in the UK is the dependent ban that went into effect January 1st, where no longer students who are master's degrees or bachelor's degree candidates cannot bring dependents with them, family members with them, spouse or children, cannot accompany a student unless you're a doctoral level student in the UK. So the two countries that were the biggest receivers of those dependent visas in the last 5 years in the UK were from Nigeria and India. So India is going to be taking a little bit of a hit, but Nigeria especially. The numbers from UK for student visas from Nigeria to the UK for this year-on-year numbers from January or December to last December to this December were down 76% for student visa issuance in Nigeria going to the UK. So direct result of that dependent visa ban. So government policy absolutely has an impact and can have a dramatic impact on the key sending markets if government policy goes the way against these key markets and what the majority of them have come for, then you're going to see the drop-offs. So these are things that you can't plan for necessarily as an international educator, but it just reinforces the need for a greater diversification of markets in terms of where we recruit students from. We saw this starting in the mid-teens when Saudi Arabia cut off their scholarship programs to non-top 200 schools in the world. That meant most of the U.S. colleges that have been getting plenty of Saudis into their English language programs and then degree programs saw significant drop-offs. If you weren't already prepared by having a diverse pool of where other students were coming from, you were really hit hard. Many English language programs that relied on Saudis and Brazilians on scientific mobility programs were closed as a result because those were the two primary sources. Brazil's coming back and as the number one source of intensive English program students in the United States now, so maybe that will rebound. But there was a period there and then the pandemic where English language programs were really hitting rock bottom. So that's a result of government policy changes or in terms of what was allowed and what wasn't. So absolutely, this is a government policy impacts negatively and positively. You can see both of those. So certainly Canada enjoyed the positive side of that in terms of government policy years ago when they introduced a very clear stream for study to work to residency. But the glow of that is perhaps wearing off a bit. And my colleagues at north of the border will privately share that they're concerned. So we'll see if there's change down the road. Coming, at least for the college sector, there will be, but universities should be okay. Well, that's all that we have for you today on the Roundup. Appreciate you taking the time to visit with us, watch us live or on repeat, and thanks again to everyone who's listening to the audio-only podcast. Until next week, wish you